Hello and welcome back to Parley. These are my on-the-spot responses to the prompts you folks submit. This one is from Just Rusty. Hope you'll enjoy listening. It's about modularity and good build system construction. We're going to use this example from Daggerheart, but talking about tabletop role-playing games a little bit specifically, but really good build system construction in general. This is a system you really enjoy, Just Rusty, and you're going to tell us a bit about it, and also a system where you particularly like developing for it. I think that's very interesting as well. So a neat one with regards to what makes a system in a game to pick a playstyle fun, like what makes that good. I constantly complain that this is one of the least reviewed parts of games, even though it is almost the only part that matters if you play a game for a long time. And so it's very refreshing. Just thanks. I don't know. It's nice to see somebody reviewing that. Also, I know of, but haven't played Daggerheart, and I'm interested in tabletop role-playing games. So I'm actually just kind of, thank you. This is a lovely parlay to receive. Let's take a look, Just Rusty. My close friends have recently been playing Daggerheart, okay? The TTRPG Matt Mercer and co. made as their D&D alternative. While I think a lot is being said about its unusual initiative system and the hope/fear dice, which we're not going to cover here, outside quickly saying that the hope-fear system is just incredible and the initiative system is outside the scope of this parlay. Okay, not much has been said of the actual build systems for classes. Again, like, right, I'm sure you've experienced, I haven't not looked up Daggerheart build system stuff. I'm sure that, like nearly every other game in existence, it has a very interesting but completely undiscussed build system. Thank you. Not completely undiscussed. The main way it separates itself from 5th edition is a focus on choosing your own build from a small pool of available pieces, rather than having a class and subclass, which gives specific things at each level, and those being quite fixed. So to use a simple comparison, Daggerheart sounds like, and this is the part of the game I knew about, you get a pool of little things, and the game will say something like, pick 2 from this set of 7 options for like this type of character at this level. Whereas D&D is a lot more of a build system where you pick a track, and then you slightly modify or combine other tracks and how far you go along the tracks. It is not unmodular, which is, of course, the word of the day. Modular here will just extra define, since we're going to use that word a lot in this parlay, as, pieces being able to fit together in various ways to create a variety of different effects. I think a really good modular piece of game design is something that is like a hook for a build or an enabler, but it enables 2 wholly separate things. Is a very simple example of a really good modular piece of design. Not everything has to enable 2 wholly separate things. A very simple thing that I like would be, this is the ability to make slow people go first, but it also turns off an ability which, if it is in effect, makes slow people go first. This is Trick Room from Pokemon. And I'm delighted at how Trick Room is at once a strategy and also the counterplay to the strategy. You could just use it to turn it off, and then slower Pokemon don't go first anymore. Whereas Tailwind, which makes you fast, you can use your own Tailwind, but it doesn't, negate. You can't turn it off. Well, except with Trick Room. And so that's a very efficient set of things. Cool. Yeah. And it does sound like, as we go on, this game has a pretty relatively small and hopefully relatively high quality and reused list of abilities and effects. And so another element of the modularity you'll hear about later is how this game will share, or you could say reuse, we'll get to that later, some of these features. Pretty cool. While some 5e classes are more modular than others, that's another difference. In 5th edition, depending on what class you pick, the modularity changes a lot. Like Warlock is the best example. Yep, I agree. And spell lists give a lot of ways to separate one wizard or cleric from another, or one wizard cleric from another. A particular ancestry, class, and multiclass, and subclass or subclasses combination is normally going to look pretty similar every time in D&D. Yeah, I would mostly agree. There is certainly a very wide variety of possible characters, but if you build a certain build archetype in D&D, it basically doesn't work unless you do almost everything the same as somebody else who did it. Usually the difference is that you have extra spell choices and you can choose specific options, but a lot of the time it is kind of clear. If you have an extra third level spell, you probably pick Fireball, or cantrips. And I'm not saying it's bad not to. I think Fireball is actually overrated. There, I said it. But it's not, it's overrated. You know what I mean? It's really good. It's just not the best spell of all time in every situation. It's overrated. Doesn't mean it's bad. And having that be fairly broadly available is maybe not that good. So, by contrast, Daggerheart mixes this up by each class having 2 decks of cards associated called domains. And at each level, you get to pick a card from one of your 2 domains, and a couple new, more powerful cards are added to the pool to pick from each level. There's nothing stopping you from pulling from earlier levels if something seems important, though. So it's kind of like when you level up, you get a couple of libraries and you get a certain number of choices of abilities you can check out from the library or buy. It's like a bookstore because you don't return them. You keep these features. And you do get stronger ones as you go up. The options increase, but you can pick from the older ones too. Pretty cool. This is in addition to having a couple of subclasses to choose from, meaning that 2 characters playing the same class can be radically different to one another. It's almost like the classes have 2 branches, and then regardless of which of those you pick, there are a few subclasses. Sort of as if the class has 2 separate kinds of subclasses, is kind of how it sounds. That's weird, interesting, but obviously on a simple level, that creates a good amount of combinations. You can have 4 subclasses or 2 domains and 2 subclasses. So you can combine the domain and subclass one 2 by 2, 4 different ways. But of course, at the same time, you'll have characters that are, splashing because you don't have to commit to domains. It doesn't sound like you can kind of pick and choose a little bit from cards like that. And there just might be certain things that I would imagine will say something like you have to have some effect from this domain to use this, maybe. But for the most part, it seems like you get a similar number of options for a similar amount of design work. It's just that you can recombine them much more. And your class, your ultimate class, is made up of more parts that are different rather than being more of a track, if you will. Sure, sounds cool. In the base game, each domain is used by 2 different classes. Thing I mentioned before about, modular or reusing things, giving 9 classes, each using a combination of 2 domains. For example, Warrior and Guardian both use Blade domain, which has cards based on soldiering, using weapons, and tenaciousness. But Warrior has access to the Bone domain, which is more about evasion, strategy, and cunning. Interesting. While Guardian has access to the Valor domain, which is about withstanding damage through armor, inspiring, protecting allies, and moving opponents. Ooh, and shifting people a little bit too. Cool. Yeah, fleshing out like a tanking role a little bit more. Just Rusty continues with newer classes being tested in The Void, Daggerheart's equivalent to Unearthed Arcana, or like beta testing materials that they distinguish. We've mainly seen characters who use an existing domain and a new one. So the Daggerheart version of like the Blood Hunter uses Blade and Blood, which is not in the base rules. Got it. Okay. So this is also really nice for the topic we're transitioning into in this parlay, which is developing the system more. It sounds like you're saying when they try new classes, basically they can do a format where they take an existing domain, so Blade, and then combine it with one that they want to introduce new mechanics into the game with, so Blood. Blood Hunter is this homebrew class, quite popular, one of the most popular homebrew classes for 5th edition, I think by Matt Mercer and co, and it is a Witcher-like class. I like the version of Blood Hunter that is intelligence-based, so the way my table plays Blood Hunter, and I've actually run 2 Blood Hunters. This is one of my favorite classes. It's really good, I think. I don't really like the revised version, actually, which is interesting. Anyway, the intelligence version is kind of like an intelligence ranger, sort of, or a little bit like a more martial-focused version of artificer, you might think of it as. But it's strength or dexterity plus intelligence to multiclass into with this version. And it gets things like the ability to buff its weapons with specific damage types, a little variety, very much like in The Witcher using blade oils to like give you advantage against certain enemies. But, good against type weaknesses, you're hunting around for that. It has a couple of ranger/hunter-like ideas that are tracking certain types of creatures, and it also has these blood curses, which are a sort of like debuff mini spell, mini warlock packed magic spell slot that you can explode onto enemies to give them various debuffs, like they're blind for a turn or some such. And then you use these alongside like mostly martial abilities, though it can get a little more half spellcastery as well. It's definitely less spellcastery than a ranger and more martial than an artificer most of the time, though it can flex to be like around there. Like many homebrew additions to D&D, D&D is a pretty broad game, so it can feel a little redundant, but I think he did a really good job making it feel mostly like its own thing that isn't that like covered territory. You know, in D&D, Artificer doesn't have that many subclasses as well, and so having a little bit of overlap there, and then Intelligence is probably the least used stat, and so having a little more overlap there is certainly not the worst thing in the world, especially since this Intelligence character, though they get access to Pact Magic through a subclass, mini Pact Magic, and these Blood Curses, doesn't get like normal spell slots, and so it's not like they're casting wizard spells, you know? We don't have even more of that in the game. Nothing wrong with that. I think we have the right amount in D&D right now. So it's a cool class. It's a class I recommend at least reading and borrowing stuff from, because I think it's cool. It sounds like they remade that, Blade, and then they can introduce Blood Domain. Something that's really cool about that is that I was just saying how D&D can feel like it is fairly comprehensive sometimes. It depends how you look at it. And so something like Blood Hunter getting added, well, it can feel like something that isn't really part of the core game. What I mean is things like Blood Hunter has a couple of features where you need to use a hit die or like lose a bit of health to gain an effect, which I don't think is a bad idea at all. That's cool. I don't think that's negative. But it is something that I feel compared to the other classes is a little outside, you know, for something that might be a touch underpowered, but then you also on average will have lost a little bit of health. I feel like is not that unfair, really. It's more like it just feels a little out of step with a lot of the rest of the game. Okay, so for Daggerheart, though, this ability to attach it to domains is a really nice way to make sure that most things in the game are part of an idea that the game at least a little bit features somewhere else. And so what I mean are domains, right? If you imagine those Blood Hunter features that I mentioned before, that I felt were a little separate from the rest of D&D, as blood domain cards, abilities you can get from the blood domain for classes which have access to it, among other things. Well, then if it's included in at least one other class eventually, then it inherently feels incorporated as part of the game while providing some sort of development efficiency. You know, you also just have this in the lexicon of the game. Could also be pretty cool if you make a homebrew class, right? I could imagine you could have a lot of fun just by combining two existing domains and saying there's this new class with these new subclasses that otherwise is simply the ability to access this and this domain together, which could be novel. I don't know. I'm imagining something like nature, like druid like magic or domain plus blood domain. You know, what do you get out of that? Maybe necromancy, maybe some kind of evil nature magic, corrupting magic kind of feel. And mechanically, you know, you get nature magic and then the ability to do blood hunter things. And so maybe a very interesting type of nega or anti-ranger. Sounds cool. Anyway, and so, yeah, pretty neat. I think the idea to have there be domains and subclasses like that, and then domains can incorporate new stuff into the game in a really organic feeling way. And we'll get into it a little bit later, but also there's a nice onboarding thing. If you play this Blood Hunter variant for Daggerheart, well, then you already know Blade if you've played a warrior or a guardian from the game. And so you could try the class out, and you already know half of the domain part of the features. Very nice. A warrior and guardian, Just Rusty says, may look very similar if both take from the Blade pile of cards every level, but if they take from the piles they don't share, they could look radically different. There's also an additional system where every level up, in addition to taking a new card, players also pick two choices from a pool of options to add things like extra hit points or ability scores, meaning there's a lot of personal choice all the way down. So this is huge. It means compared to something like D&D, one of the main problems is that you do not ever develop stat boosts naturally. You have to spend ability score increases, which you get at specific levels only, to increase your stats. Now, you can't increase your stats that much either. This is, in my opinion, one of the most awkward parts of D&D. It doesn't have an elegant way to make it so if you want choices, you can pull the lever of, hey, I get an ability score increase, I could take a feat, which gives me choices. But for a lot of classes, it is crushingly suboptimal for their damage output, to the point of you like sort of just losing statistically if you don't at least once take one of those decision points and just do an ability score increase. And in my opinion, this is not a very fun thing to pick compared to, you have to pick an uninteresting but technically superior option compared to a bunch of more interesting things. When that happens, I feel like in game design terms, you should nearly always just give the player the uninteresting thing and let them pick from the interesting things. If you play tabletop D&D, I would gently suggest that if you don't already start at like a higher level, you consider simply allowing your players to naturally get like the full amount of the ability score in their score, as long as they don't abuse the power that provides. Understand that a player determined to abuse such a rule can gain a huge amount of power by basically just making a really greedy build, and then this homebrew hand waving would basically just like add their stats for free, and so they get 2 extra feats on some like really broken build. That's obviously not good. I'm not recommending it for a situation like that. But if you have, like, to be blunt, actually a good play group that has like a reasonable social contract in place, you should be able to just say, like, when you're level 4, 6, 8, there can be a sort of coming of age moment where you kind of just get your stats. Because for most builds in D&D, this is not a good or interesting part of the game. It's kind of just a drag that is there. Another option is to literally just eliminate stat increases. You can just remove them from the game. They are barely a part of D&D, in my opinion. You can just say your character's stats are this, and that's it. And they might get extra proficiencies, but like, and their proficiency bonus goes up, but they don't get like other stats explicitly except by doing specific things. That's more elegant. There's very little stat increase hook in D&D. Like, it doesn't matter much what your stats are beyond the default a lot of the time, except for the raw math of the game working out. So if you simply allow players to obtain those stats and then just move on, it turns out the game works surprisingly well. This is a lot of faff, though. I mean, why? Of course, you see what I mean? And so it's a very good idea to create a game where there's just a pool of like, hey, you need some basic stuff too, maintenance things, just go grab them. The way I might like to think of it is your players go shopping sometimes. Well, they sometimes want to go to a potion shop specifically to get potion seller. I need your strongest potions. That parlay existed where we did that. And other times they want to go to the general store. And so items. I'm going to be a little bit ridiculous for a sec. Humanity is all about build systems. We humans are adapted to lose a bunch of good adaptations and physically just sort of mildly kind of suck at a lot of things, just so that we can use items, just so that we can make use of our tool use, if you like to think of it that way. We evolved a bigger brain, lost a bunch of body hair. Well, it depends who you are, but anyway, you know, it's still a lot less than most animals, right? That's not a lot compared to other animals. It's not clothes, and so we made clothes, and thank goodness. The point is, humans can equip things. It's sort of our thing. We have opposable thumbs and a brain, and like, that's sort of it. The liver is pretty impressive. Otherwise, sort of a mess, but it's fine because you can simply equip the items you need. Therefore, shopping is a build system. And was this the most contrived way to do it? It was. But my point is that you should make a general store of build systems as well. Build systems being a one-stop shop for the player making game style decisions. How do they want to play? How do they want to experience the game? That will apply generally and more specifically. And I think that a lot of games can get a lot of mileage by just separating those pools. Specifically, just thinking of it this way. In the reverse, if Daggerheart took all of the same design, but simply didn't separate it into all these pools, that would be worse, yes? You would feel like you didn't have the ability to separate probably powerful stat increases and hit point bonuses from more exciting choices. You would feel overwhelmed when picking domains and wouldn't learn as much of a defined or guided crossover between classes. Classes would lose a lot of identity, and this modularity would dissolve into a sort of mush of being able to do everything everywhere. If the modularity would go too far, we'll get into that a little bit later, actually. It would be bad in various ways, simply from the act of not having there be separate stores for the general store items in the build system and the potion seller or armory, the sword and shield shop, the blacksmith in the build system. That alone makes a huge difference, that's really cool. Multiclassing is also a lot cleaner. Sure, I can imagine with multiclass being one of these level up choices once you reach a certain tier of play. Oh, interesting. You kind of unlock multiclassing. That's neat. It takes both your level up options for a particular level. It takes both your level up options for a particular level. This means that there isn't the same element of picking breakpoints to multiclass at. The system instead gives you the class feature, a subclass feature, and access to cards from one of the two domains for that domain that would be available at half your level rounded up every time you're leveling up. Oh, interesting. You get kind of like a sidecar class. Very interesting. So it sounds to me like you kind of merge classes a little. You simply add some options to the thing you were playing before. Neat. Sort of like taking half of the other class and simply attaching it to the class that you have currently. That sounds cool. That's not the same complication of being a 9th level character, but a 6th level fighter and a 3rd level druid. Sure. It's a lot closer to half caster subclasses in 5th edition. Progression hasn't been slowed. You're just choosing the casting instead of something else. Interesting. Yep. And I do also think that while I find very interesting, deeply imperfect, but very interesting, the bespoke multi-class system of D&D, which if you don't understand currently, I don't want you to be scared off, but I'm not going to explain it in this parlay. Like it's complicated enough that I'm not just going to explain it off the top of my head right now, though I definitely could. It is a system I enjoy, but it's very... Anyway, yeah, this is a lot cleaner, and I see what you mean. I think that the biggest point of friction for a lot of people is that managing of breakpoints, or like when you stop being on a certain track that I mentioned before. And so completely removing that is probably a good idea, unless you would want to take it in the other direction if you were to revise the design. You could take the design of stopping a track at a certain point and then moving up another track a bit and then resuming this track later that D&D's multiclassing currently has. I think you'd want to advance that design to make it worth the complication and confusion it can add by making it more fun, like just better, frankly, more fun, more coherent, have less... It's weird, you kind of lose decision points in D&D multiclassing. We're not going to get it. It's a different parlay. Well, maybe it's not, but I'll cover the stuff you wanted to discuss first. It's a fairly different parlay. Good example, yeah, and probably a good change. As someone whose favorite D&D class was Warlock, mainly because it let you pick and choose a variety of options and put them together. Sorry, that is just Rusty again, but I think that as well. This system really appeals to me. But as someone who dabbles in making homebrew classes, it appeals to me even more as a designer than it does as a player. We've talked before when reviewing classes I've homebrewed about how it's hard to keep all 20 class features at each level on theme, or for an idea introduced late in the class progression to feel like it's not come out of nowhere. Deciding which levels to slot each feature in can be really complicated, particularly when there are roughly comparable abilities competing for similar budget slots and certain things which must take a certain slot, big spells or an extra attack at level 5, for example. I've been building an artificer class and an invention domain for someone at my table in Daggerheart, and by contrast you found it very incredibly freeing, that as long as the cards you make for the domain are on theme and budgeted about right, you can be a lot looser on theming. Most domains are juggling about 3 to 4 ideas, so as long as a card fits into one of those 3 big ideas, and you've hit all those ideas by about 3rd level, the exact ordering of cards is much less important. Sure, lots of notes about that point, but let's finish it. With 21 cards, okay, so that's an idea, to make, and an understanding players will only be picking about 1/3 of them at most, there's a lot more space to fill all the ideas a domain might want to cover. Cards also have a system of hand cost, where you can only have a certain amount active at a time. So in a system that adds 2 cards per level, if you have 3 ideas for cards around that power level, you always have the option to add or decrease the cost of the strongest or weakest of the 3 and drop it up or down a level. Very easy knob to turn to balance. Nice. There's also the mental ease of, oh, I'll just make a couple cards this evening over having a subclass be the smallest unit of customization. And it sounds like even if you were to make a whole subclass in this game, that's kind of a smaller, I'm not exactly clear, part of your class. And so even that would be more straightforward. Pretty cool. Yeah, again, lots of great points about what makes it a good system to homebrew or like develop more for, even for the official developers. Quite neat. I'm very happy you included a lot of that detail too. All in all, I've been very impressed with it as a system. A lot of online dialogue has been about how loosey-goosey its rule set is, but there's a lot of really good game design under the hood. I found the build system has a lot of very satisfying depth without having the mechanical crunch of something like Pathfinder or 5e gumming up the wheels. Yeah, and I mean, the loosey-goosiness of the rules, it's interesting. There are a lot of modern tabletop role-playing games that are very rules light. They have very few overall rules. And where they're coming from at a glance is, well, you don't need to read this big rule book to play the game. Your players won't be intimidated and etc. But I have a lot of complaints with a lot of those games. First of all, I think that a lot of the problem is not actually that it is bad to have a rule for all those things, but that people feel the need to strictly follow them. And that a lot of the negative sentiment is actually the feeling of intimidation of learning a new game. Not that it's actually hard to learn a lot of well-designed new tabletop role-playing games. I also think a lot of it is specifically just D&D. That is, statistically, almost all groups have never played anything but D&D. So to be blunt, sorry to be a bit harsh, statistically, you listening to these groups, but most people simply do not actually know how anything it is to try a new game. And so on one level, I know where those systems are coming from, but my point, and that's not bad, I guess, but my point is that in a broader sense, they're not actually coming from it being bad to have like a qualified rule for this thing. They're coming from people being exhausted by or intimidated by that. And the problem with that is just that if you actually play all those other games, it's not to say it's bad to have a rules light experience, but I think a lot of groups will find it's not as guided as what they wanted. It's not that they want less rules, they want clearer rules. They want less redundant or bloated rules. They want more elegant rules. They don't want a lack of any game structure. There are groups that do want that. I just feel like these groups don't need as much help. Those tables, those games don't need as much help. I feel like if you're able to theater of mind it, and we do a whole hell of a lot of theater of minding in my table, I would say I and my play group are in this category. I just don't think we are the party that needs the most help, personally. I feel like most of the industry is pretty good for us right now. And frankly, if you try any new tabletop role-playing games, you're probably already in a pretty good place. I would rather make a game that provides the guidance. There is a rule book of specific rules if you want them, and yet just isn't too dense for the player to get into. And so this combination is something I can really appreciate, in other words. A lot of those looser systems, if I were to be critical, the thing is they don't have much actual game design in them to make it so things are reliably good and fun. People broadly, I think it's fair to say, do not understand what game design is or is for in terms of like fun, not just like technically what do you do. And I think this is a great system where, yeah, it sounds like they put real effort into making the game part of the game, the crunchy mechanics of the game, be fun and guide the player to having fun, guide the designer, and goodness knows if you're playing tabletop role-playing games, you are a game designer to some small degree, so it's relevant to you having fun playing the game that it be easy to modify. That is part of the game with a tabletop role-playing game, with almost all of them anyway. Certainly this one. So that is delightful. What incredible news to hear. Now, edit. I realized looking back at this, I never verbalized my actual question, which is for how much I love this system and how much I love modular systems. What weaknesses do you think they have? So not just Staggerheart, but modular games like this in general. Sure, I thought this was a really good parlay with a lot of great detail that's fun to talk about as we go. So we've done that. Now for the remaining third or so of the parlay, I did, when I took notes in this parlay, actually just write down a bunch of stuff and then candidly got to the end and went, oh yeah, you really didn't ask a question. Negative things. I wrote down some negative things. So anyway, we did already discuss like a few and I tried to put pins in them. I'll bring those up now. But yeah, there's a lot of good things. The first one, I'll try to go vaguely in order from less bad to more bad. Less bad, maybe not bad at all. I do think the mental ease of design can be a little bit of an issue. So let me read the relevant passage again. And probably a lot of people did not think this when they read this part. So anyway, I'll just give you my side of the thought. I still think this is a great point and a good thing, but also has a negative side. You said most domains are about juggling 3 to 4 ideas. So as long as the card fits into one of those 3 big ideas and you've hit all the ideas by about 3rd level, the exact ordering of the cards is much less important. There's also the mental ease of, oh, I'll just make up a couple of cards this evening over having a subclass be the smallest unit of customization. It's true. I guess I just feel like this is a case where the build system is doing good work to make it much easier for you to modify things and develop new stuff. However, this doesn't necessarily create good design habits. I would imagine you might want to put it differently. It's not like necessarily making you a worse designer, maybe. I think the content of my concern here, and remember, this is the most mild concern, it's not a huge thing, just something that came to mind, is that this game is maybe very kind or nice from a design perspective. You could argue the other way and say, well, Zandy, why don't more games just have modular build systems? And that's why we'll go on to talk about some of the drawbacks of those. However, I would agree that there isn't a great reason that there aren't some amount more build systems like this. So maybe it is kind of hollow to say, oh, it's teaching you to develop in a way that is unrealistically easy, unless the game also has a modular system, which maybe a good number of games do or should have. And so, yeah, I'm talking myself out of it. Like, this is not that big a deal, maybe. Anyway, that was the content of my concern there. It just seems like a game where it might be going very well, but would teach you rather little about designing elsewhere. It might also be the opposite, though. The training wheels phenomenon. Using training wheels does help you ride a bike without training wheels. And so sometimes there's also a concept in psychology called hazard care. I don't remember exactly. Basically, this is the idea that if you have a fear that you need to get over, it's a pretty good strategy. Probably take a break from it first and recover a little bit and take it easy and lead yourself back in. Don't jumping into the deep end is mostly a bad strategy, according to psychology. That can work. There are cases where it works really well. A really noteworthy one, a counterexample comes to mind, is like language. Immersion is a usually pretty more effective way for adults to learn a language, which I think is really interesting. And kids learn immersively pretty well as well, obviously. That's how they normally learn by default. Yeah, it's not true everywhere. But yeah, I don't know. Let's leave this one alone. But it was a thought that I had. Okay, a couple more specific things. I guess to get into a little more of a negative, but this is one where it's kind of about what you think a build system is for. Basically, we need to discuss what does make a build system good. And we're going to run into one of those have your cake and eat it too situations where this might not be a flaw as much as just there are indeed compromises to doing things this way, I guess is all I'm saying. So the modularity. I won't bore you with the more obvious point, which is that maybe obviously a lot of people just don't want that many decision points. I do think D&D has a very awkward, very ugly, but pretty functional actually, just very ugly way to do this function system where if you pick a default class, you don't have that many decision points and it's really good. A single class character in D&D is better than almost all possible most multi-classing characters, but a multi-class character you work at and come up with a good synergy for is usually stronger than that. And I believe this creates this nice system where newer players will come into the system, play a single class fighter, be very effective and have the basic tools to interact with the game. Maybe rogue is even better, with a little loop that ensures you get some damage in and some social skills. That I think rogue is a very good beginner class, actually, personally. And it also multiclasses sort of well, so I think that is neat. And then another player at the table can be playing some kind of hybrid spellcaster, and it can be surprisingly okay depending on the tone of the table and the balancing. Here, it seems like, of course in the book, I would imagine, they're going to write something like, by default, choose these things. Here's a default loadout of stuff. And so you might be thinking, as I'm often tempted to think, that that means that there's no onboarding difficulty here. But I don't think that's really true. I think that for many people, the very same way that for some reason tracking multiple timetables of class features, but like they're pretty on rails. And so in theory, you do just have to pick, do I take a level in fighter or do I take a level in warlock? Like that breaks some people's brains, even though you could also argue that it's kind of straightforward too. The same thing here. Like, I think this sounds easy and fun to use, but I know that there will be people for whom the idea that you don't just have a class and a subclass, but that it's kind of more open than that will just break some people's brains. Like they can't file it the way their filing cabinet system is managed or something. I don't mean to belittle anyone who has difficulty with that. I'm belittling the human brain's mercurial ability to manage information like this. So yeah, no offense if you find this overwhelming. This point is for you, just to be clear. I'm saying that I, finding this easy, do not think I am objectively right in finding it easy. And therefore, for some people, I just know this will break their brain actually more in some ways. This is a very frustrating area of like educational psychology where the noise is very difficult to separate from the signal. People have so many biases and negative experiences, and our education system in the part of the world I live in is so bad that many people appear to learn different ways when in reality, I'm sure most of that is noise. And I feel whatever the current educational psychology opinion is, it is extremely difficult to deduce what is actually a good way for people to actually learn from basically just avoiding their hangups, I would say, which is not the same thing. You're not making a system that is enduringly good, that will stand the test of time, for one thing, but also for whom, like people who do have their feet on the ground, it will just be good. Like if you don't have some hang up, this isn't just fixing that. This is just a good way to do the thing. I'm not saying it's not good to cater to people's known hangups. I'm just saying it's not as effective as it would be nice to know what would be a good way for people to learn in general. So, general knowledge way of making classes would be nice, and I think this is a different way. Basically, the contents of this concern is I certainly don't think it's an objectively better way, though. I think in many ways it is just different, and if you like build systems, you will like that. But in many ways, more decision points, I feel, is a kind of have your cake and eat it too situation with people who want something they can just get started with. Even if I'm sure nowadays the game includes like, oh, just use these default options. Like, okay, but at the same time, I feel like hooking the player into, oh, they made their own thing. It's a hard question. You know, Baldur's Gate 3 starts with pretty much you making a character for an RPG, you know, picking skills and abilities that you don't know what they do. And I feel like this is a pretty huge mistake, but nearly all existing RPGs start this way. They ask you to choose abilities that if you have not played the game before, you do not know what they do, and then commit to them, basically, you know, unless you respec. But that's a lot of what it is for most people is homework, even though it's fun to me. To me, this kind of seems like that exacerbates those issues. I guess that's my main point. It makes the onboarding and the flexibility for the average player worse at the very likely improvement for the enfranchised player. You know everything in the game. Maybe it's a lot more fun to have it be modular. I do think the cards is really nice, but on the same topic, the faff of like having a bunch of disparate things. Again, I just know there will be people for whom the one character sheet appeals to them so much more. I hate character sheets. I hate them. I think they're very wonderful as physical objects, as artifacts of the game you played, and I hate everything else about them. I think all of them are not well designed. I think it's objectively overwhelming, even though I know that isn't completely objective. I feel like there's a better way, which is cards. I feel like there's a better way you can do for kind of every game, which is to buy a cheap receipt printer, which is what this is. This is a $25 thermal printer, which is what receipt paper is, printer. I didn't realize until recently, but of course, if you have you ever serviced the printer before? Like an ink printer? If you have, you'll know that you would rather die than service an ink printer. And so, if every single receipt printer in the world, whenever you get a receipt, whenever you commit a transaction in the world, had to be serviced like an inkjet printer, we would all lose our minds and go crazy, and the world would end within the day. So, of course, it occurred to me suddenly, we must have invented some technology that allows you to print small things without ink. Because if we didn't, I have no idea how, like, logistically, there's just no possible way. Looks around at the, shopping center that I'm in. And indeed, obviously, you can just buy, and this is not complicated technology. It's not expensive. It's easy to use. You take a screenshot on your phone, it prints out the screenshot in black and white. You can get it to look something like this. I know it's reversed for you, but here you can see a couple of like ability, screenshots, or like I'll take my text. I own the 5.5e player's manual, player's handbook for D&D right now. So often we'll just lay the page flat and take a picture out of that, take a picture from 5e tools or D&D Beyond or something, and then just print it out and put it in. These are gaming card sleeves, and of course you could do different colors, you could do different sizes. These happen to be the like Yu-Gi-Oh card. I don't know what the official size name is. I think small European gaming card size. I don't know if that's true. That might actually be the size Magic the Gathering cards are. And then there's a tarot card size. Anyway, any of the three. If you want to add images to them, a suggestion would be you can get sleeves like this in the tarot card size, buy a deck of tarot cards you think is pretty, and put that in the back, and then have the little receipt, and then have it, you can see, or maybe you can't see, but these are receipts tucked in with like placeholder, clear. Yeah, there, now you can see that there's a receipt and then like the little card. And so you can make little things. You can do this to any game you want. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, but I'm not sure that that's actually something most people prefer. And actually, it would be a good way to test that, to do this, copy this system, right? For like $30, you can get started doing the thing I just described with 2 easy payments of $14.99. I'm not trying to sell this thing to you, but it's a good idea, don't you think? For some tables that will work really well. Try it if you have players. I'm currently doing a hybrid campaign where I'm playing 5th edition, and one of my players, their character sheet is this system. It's mostly cards. It's kind of Daggerheart, though, again, I did this independently. I think this is just one of the obvious solutions. I'm sure other games do it too. And then, they have a little bit of a sheet. They have a folder, actually, like a manila organizing folder, business folder. And then I have somebody else who's playing with a normal character sheet, and we're trying to compare and feel out those systems. Basically, what I'm saying here is I feel like it's kind of a wash, and there will be just as many people for whom it is just as big a problem for them to have it be disparate cards as it is a problem for people to have a character sheet, basically. I kind of think that neither are good systems, and am sort of questioning what a good system would be. Just, if you care about this, I know there's not a lot of terribly negative things in this section. If you're interested in this topic, let me just get you started with a few other ways you can do it, and then you can decide if you feel like these are good ways or those are good ways. The 2 other obvious ones that occur to me are, 1, there is a specific rule for each specific situation, and the game master just describes what that is each time. This is the system that something like Stonetop uses. The way I'm going to describe it, if that sounds complicated and unmanageable, it's totally not. It's kind of like mini games, but like obviously everything is more united by dice rolls. And so, when you do a fight, things work similarly to when you die, to when you do a social check. Things are more similar. That's the first step. And then the second step is that then, because things are more similar and therefore a little bit more streamlined, you can have the game master tell the players the specifically well-designed situation to resolve each specific type of event. And those things can be much more specifically designed. A little bit like the Magic the Gathering versus Yu-Gi-Oh thing, Magic the Gathering has codified language that you can learn and then use to deduce what all the cards do. Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't do that, which sounds like less overhead, but instead puts all of the bespoke rules on the card that applies those rules, which is, you have the rules right there, but if you see a card you haven't played against before, you need to read a lot of text to understand remotely what is going on. Every single time that happens forever. Whereas these systems kind of do the opposite. They sort of remove that and say combat is this mini game that applies these basic rules of conflict this way, and then you can just do it. This greatly reduces the rules bulk in practice for the player. It might not sound like it does, but if you're interested in that, you can try that system very easily. You can get the PDF for like $10 and just see if you like it. I do. I think it's good. I think that's good. That is one of the viable ways to do it. I think it is one of the better ways to do it. And then a final one, a fourth one, basically is to just condense more, to try to make more modular features. You can do this from a design perspective in a way I haven't seen a lot of games do, but basically it would be taking a few different things a character can do and making them all share a resource, basically be like opportunity costs with each other. You use one and then not the other, and then basically you've turned these into the same feature. There are lots of things in D&D where you could just take a class or a subclass, and if you really put your mind to it, like that could be this size. Like all of it could be this size. All of the good stuff, all the fun could be like much more condensed. And if you did that, you could have a system that had so little text basically, while having such dense like interacting with the world features, that you could potentially make a game that didn't really have a character sheet or a bunch of cards. It just had very few. It does have cards and or a character sheet, but they would just be much more minimal. To a degree that I think people would just find it to be like a flashcard rather than like a lexicon of stuff they can do. I do think a big part of it is the homework part. Just if all these criticisms seem kind of shallow, not that bad of a thing about modular build systems, well, that's because I think that they are only modest problems with modular build systems. I think that making your build system modular is good. And so the bad things, there are bad parts, but they're just not that bad, according to me. But one of the worst things, I think, is the player feeling like they have to do a sort of homework. Leveling up can be kind of a punishment in a way, if the player has to go choose a thing. I, and a lot of you listening statistically, you probably listen to this because you like making these kinds of build decisions. You're thinking it's literally just not. You get a cool thing. You get rewarded with a fun new ability. Yeah, that's how I feel. But I think that this system bombards the player with more cases where they do that. And the trade-off is, there is a trade-off. They don't have to write them down. They get a card that just is their feature, is a lot better of a way to say, hey, you level up, here's your cool new thing. That's really good. That's actually one of the major reasons why I made the card system. I was trying to make it so one of my players who really likes the game but just despises the bookkeeping element of the game, they just delete that. Like we can literally just Control-Alt-Delete and then hit print. And that's gone, if that's really what you hate so much. And then it can be, I level up, oh, you're level 5, here is the extra attack feature. See you next week. Like, that has worked very well. So that is an enormous strength of the system, but I do think the decision points thing is a potential negative. Again, remember that I'm currently using this card system in D&D, where by having it be cards and then D&D, we've combined a system that's pretty on rails with a system that basically just gives you your feature in an encapsulated item I can just hand you, right? And it might be that it's those two things combined together that is alleviating that tension for my player. So I wonder about that. It's a point of concern. I will check my notes and see. Honestly, in my mind, I had even more negative, but still not that negative, things to say about this. I just don't think there's that many negatives. And we talked a lot about a lot of good stuff. So here in my notes, it says about the point with it's bad for your development habits, but like probably not that bad. And maybe more games ought to just be modular. Maybe being cautious about how this system allows you to not cut ideas that much. That's maybe the biggest thing. That's a better point that I should have mentioned earlier. Yep. I'm glad I took notes on that part. Like it might give you bad design habits in like bloat, basically. That having less things is basically always good as long as you're not losing meaningful choices. Getting the least possible choices in a system with the most possible actual options for the player to use. I think is a very simple way to improve essentially any build system. Are there a bunch of choices that are just a bunch of stats? Can you completely remove or just roll those together somehow so that most of the time the player is making a decision, they're choosing a specific ability rather than something kind of rote? This is an improvement to virtually any game, in my opinion. And there's only a few designs that at least make the argument that it's fun to kind of route that. The obvious one is Path of Exile, I guess, and its skill tree. There's a lot of nodes that are just like a rote stat increase, but the idea is that you get a huge amount of points and you're routing a rather complicated sort of bespoke class through that tree. So it makes the argument that that homeworking is like worth it, sort of. I completely disagree, by the way. I think Path of Exile's build system is pretty sus, and is sort of guilty until proven innocent for putting that much extra overhead on the player for like that much more fun than other games. Like, I just don't, that wasn't my experience anyway. But it's still a really interesting system that offers a point of comparison. You get the point I'm trying to make. Condensing this is maybe good. And while Daggerheart has separated the general store and the potion shop, by giving you the modularity of having all those stores, you are kind of asking the player to go on a major multi-step shopping trip as well. So if the mental overhead seems a little wishy-washy to you, like it's hard for you, maybe as a person who doesn't find this overwhelming, to take seriously, maybe you could think of it that way as a metaphor. I think for some people, it does kind of feel like you're basically just asking them to go to more stores. And if only they could have just gone to the phone store, and they don't want to go to the phone store to get their phone fixed, but if they just go to that one place, everything gets fixed. It's like leveling up in D&D might not look so bad from some players' perspective. Again, as someone who does not like that and likes this system, I'm kind of having to reach a little bit, but I'm imagining the things people might dislike, and there definitely are some, just not a huge amount, in my opinion. I wanted to say, I think the hand cost thing, we said lots of positive things, but the hand cost thing is also really cool. That idea that just like you can often make build systems better by taking the decision points the player makes and making it so there's as few of those as possible that are just like you increase a stat or whatever, you just increase damage a bit. Unless that's a compelling biting choice between that and some other ability, and then make it so it's just those. You can often make a system with relatively few decision points, but which have a relatively large impact. And I believe these are mostly the best build systems. That the modularity thing with the sharing cards is good. I think another way you can improve pretty much any build system is by simply causing some opportunity cost thing in the game where you have limited slots to pick from features to have the ability to have things cost different amounts of capacity in those slots. It could be as simple as something like you get 3 new abilities when you level up, but these few cards actually cost 2 of your 3 choices. So you can pick these 3 abilities, or if you want this more powerful and expensive ability, you can pick that and then 1 more instead. You have to sacrifice another choice to get that. Cool. This allows some things to be more or less powerful and still be kind of vaguely coherent in the opportunity cost of the system. And having something like the way I did it, you'll notice just quickly, not to brag about my game design off the cuff, is that by having it be 3 choices and then some things cost 2, if the player picks a bigger thing, they still get to choose a smaller thing. And so you have like the basic unit. I think in general, it's really good if your more expensive choice leaves the player with enough when they level up to still pick the least expensive kind of choice. So they can get like a utility thing as they go as well. These are often really good for correcting the player's experience of the game, and the player doesn't feel like they're spending that much on these options in their build. So I think I've experienced that players are more likely to pick something that they just want if it's cheap in the build system. And so therefore, if you want players to have fun, and they will have more fun if they pick things they want, you want it to be that they have a ready access to picking the cheap thing in the build system. So if you make a more expensive one, it can be advantageous to make sure it still leaves room to pick the cheap one as well. You could go way further with this and have a system where you have 100 points when you level up, and this costs 30, and this other thing costs 12, and this costs like 23, and you could do that. I don't know, sure. I can see that You probably somewhere in between is a better idea, right? Anyway, so but I think that's very good. It's good for you as a designer, as you said plenty. It's also really good for the player in the system potentially. There's a lot of great onboarding once you're already in the system. Again, if the player already likes this, I have plenty more good things to say, and that just isn't what you asked. But just to add one more really quick, I think having the two domains is amazing. Once you like the game, it has this great thing that a lot of games lack where they're intermediate on ramp for the player. The player likes the game and played, but now what do they do next? Like, is not that good in many cases. The intermediate on ramp for D&D is you play a class and you like it, but now it is just as overwhelming as it was before to learn like the second class, and you may have even chosen one of the simpler ones, and so now it feels like you like it doesn't really end, you know? And I wonder how often this stops people from playing again. In this game, if you play a class, you inherently already know the domain cards for something that other classes use. If you enjoyed those blade cards from Warrior, well, you want something more tanky, you can play a Guardian, use the same blade cards you still like, and just try out a few new subclass features or different cards from a new domain. Maybe you chose the blade cards because you didn't like the bone cards, and now there's a nice, gentle nudge to try something new. You get a new set, but you also get to still use the ones you had before. Very nice. I think this will be a very appealing, like organic way for a normal person to enjoy that build system. That's awesome. Having it do that well, and I think mostly do new player stuff pretty well, I think. Again, we're assuming this system, of course, offers like defaults. The book comes with the thing that just says to people who throw their hands up and are overwhelmed, just pick these by default. Like, okay, as long as we assume that, it seems like a pretty good compromise, a system that is good for new people and people who aren't yet, hopefully, into making fun builds, but also for people that want all of the knobs to turn. Fantastic. And broadly, I do think that more games could be modular. That's pretty outside the scope of this parlay, but I don't think it's really that much of a problem to say, oh, it teaches you only to develop games that are more modular. Like maybe one ought to develop more modular games. Perfectly fine. Yeah, really cool. What a great parlay. It was a little bit you and I just gushing, and then when you said, what are the negative things? I went, it sounds pretty good. Maybe some people don't like it, and that's sort of all I had. But sorry, I did the best way I could. I honestly don't think there are that many negatives. And maybe that's part of why you asked. Maybe you were thinking, well, it doesn't seem like there are many negatives to me. Like, am I missing anything obvious? I don't know. I kind of, unfortunately, sort of feel the same way. It seems pretty good to me. But there definitely are some complexity concerns. And this is something that plagues the hobby. I don't know. This is one of those ones where I can tell that chewing on it for a while, I will think of one. Like me in 2 years or something, ask this parlay again. I'm sure there will be something really good. I will probably have forgotten I said this, but then I can almost guarantee you I will have some like significant flaw to mention about them that I have not thought of right now. I feel something kind of itching a little bit in the back of my brain. I don't think I'm gonna. I just wanted to let the parlay go a little bit longer. We're kind of pushing 1 hour here, just in case I thought of some catastrophic thing. But no, to me, there's no obvious things that are really bad. You know what I mean? I kind of feel like I'm sure there are, but I just don't know what they are. It sounds really cool. Thanks to the parlay, and genuinely, I really enjoyed this one, as you can probably tell. It's very nice for me because I kind of get a little elevator pitch for Daggerheart's build system, which I had complained in the beginning. Like, it's not like anyone's going to review. I'm sure some people will, but not as much as I would like. Anyway, so lovely for me as well. If you'd like to ask your own parlay like this one, it doesn't have to be something I'd be delighted to see. You ask whatever you darn well please, but I'm just saying I thought this was nice. You can ask one using a link in the description if you'd like. And I know a lot of you folks pay me just to support the show. So thank you very much for your support. For some of you, it is quite generous. I do think this is a nice service at a reasonable cost, but a lot of you are going above and beyond that. So just thank you very much. And I'll see you in the next one.